Welcome to our webinar featuring Companion Animal Capital Fund and the New Care Standards Act. My name is Mark Levine and I am the Deputy Director of your New York State Association of Counties. Our topic today will delve into what's needed for the RFP that is presently open and how it can help you meet the new care standards. The NYSAPF represents all of the state's animal shelters and a growing number of rescues, as well as an animal welfare organizations. The Federation is responsible for establishing the CACF and in passing the Companion Care Standards Act for shelters and rescues. Before we get started, we have a few brief housekeeping announcements. Jeanette Stanziano is our Director of Education and Training, and she is driving today's webinar. Jeanette.
Thanks, Mark. Just a couple of simple tools for you for today. We will be recording the program as we always do, and we'll post the recording with a PDF of the slide deck of the presenter on NYSAC's website under webinars, under the archived webinars. You can find that about an hour after the program, after we convert the recording. We'll also be posting it on NYSAC's YouTube channel, NYSAC TV. We want to encourage everybody to feel free to ask our presenter, Libby Post, any questions during her presentation. The way that we ask you to provide us your questions is to refer to your dashboard, click on questions, and type in your question for Libby, and we will come back to that at the end of the presentation with a brief moderated Q&A. But we do ask you to type it in, and then we will come back and go through everybody's thoughts. Mark, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. We are pleased to welcome to this webinar a rock star in Albany who does a tremendous amount of work for a lot of different organizations. It's Libby Post. She's the Executive Director of the New York State Animal Protection Federation. Libby is a good friend of NYSAC. She spoke at our recent fall seminar in Oneida County, and we've worked with her on a number of issues over the last several years. Libby, welcome. Libby Post is most comfortable with the challenge of building a new organization from scratch, from developing its brand to building membership to solidifying governance and creating a strong, solid organization. She has done just that for the New York State Animal Protection Federation, which represents the state's humane societies, SPCAs, and municipal animal shelters. When she was appointed as executive director in November of 2013, the Federation had 10 members. Now it has over 100. Libby is recognized as the go-to person on issues related to animal shelters by the state legislature, the executive chamber, and the Department of Agriculture and Markets. Among her legislative accomplishments are the Companion Animal Care Standards Act for shelters and rescues, banning the sale of puppies, kittens, and rabbits in New York State, also known as the Puppy Mill Pipeline Bill, the Companion Animal Capital Fund, since 2018, a total investment of $33 million in state budgets to assist animal shelters across the state with capital projects, banning breed-based discrimination in homeowners insurance, banning the leasing of pets. Pet stores can no longer hoodwink unsuspecting consumers into signing paperwork that actually leases them to their new pet instead of financing the purchase. 3-day hold on cats, enabling local municipalities to pass a bill to cut the hold time for unidentified cats that come into shelters from 5 to 3 days in order to save precious care dollars. In addition to passing good bills, Libby has been instrumental in stopping bad bills that would hurt shelters, peace officers, and companion animals. Libby Post holds a master's degree in public communications from the University of Albany. She is also a political consultant and local commentator on WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Libby, it's our honor to welcome you today, and we appreciate you lending your time and expertise for our members. Libby.
Well, Mark, thank you so much, and it's a good thing people can't see me because I'd be blushing all over the screen. Let me just say that the Federation works hand in hand with the ASPCA and HSUS on getting a lot of these good bills passed. We're an anomaly nationally where the three of us actually work together. That doesn't necessarily happen in other states, but it's been very, very effective over the last 10 years. So I'm going to start talking about, I hope if I can make this happen. Okay. I do not have on the bottom of my screen.
There you go. You just had it.
Oh, there it is. Okay, it's really tiny. Okay, so the Fed, Mark talked about what the Fed is. We're the statewide organization. We're a C4, which means we educate, advocate, and we lobby. And in the last few years, a number of rescues have also been joining the Fed, especially with the advent of the Care Standards Bill. Okay, wow. Okay. All right, we have 110 members across the state. And if you're interested to see who they are, you can just go to our website, and that is on the bottom of each slide. I think you guys are going to have to just forward the slides, and that's okay. Okay, next slide. Great. We also have a 501c3. We have an education fund. It's our tax deductible arm. It provides Companion Animal Care Standards Act consulting services. We provide, and that's to any organization, we provide low-cost grant writers to assist our members with the capital fund applications and the process management. We do shelter consulting so that shelters are ready for major capital projects and to enhance their policies and procedures. And I do board development and fundraising or philanthropy training as well. Next slide. So the Fed, the Education Fund, received $146,000 in funding from the Wiederhold Foundation, which does healthcare and animal welfare and one other thing, and the New York Community Trust to provide what I call no-cost, low-cost consulting services on the Care Standards Bill. What we ask the organizations to pay for are the reimbursable expenses of travel, hotel, and food. Otherwise, the consulting is free, and it's been a very effective process for us. We're expecting another $200,000 in the end of this year and the beginning of next, so we can work with an additional 40 organizations. We have a team of 6 animal welfare professionals that do this work. So far we've worked with 20 organizations across the state. And this bill does impact shelters as well as rescues, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Next slide. So as Mark said, I have 28 million, but I think he's right, it is 33. The Companion Animal Capital Fund was started by us. I do a lot of work with libraries, and there was a library construction fund, and I said, well, why can't there be a shelter construction fund? And everybody looked at me like I was nuts. But we found the right people in each house, and we made it work. And it's one of those funds that everybody loves because it's puppies and kittens. And it is, puppies and kittens are the last bastion of nonpartisanship. And nobody really argues with this because they all understand how important it is to have good shelters in their communities. The legislature does. The fund is administered by the Department of Ag and Markets. Now, in order to get this money, there's a process, and that starts right now with the New York State Grants Gateway. If you're a municipality, you're probably already there because you've been getting state funding for other things. And if you're a nonprofit and you're already there, all of you who are already there will have to transition to the statewide financial system. They're doing this in the middle of when our RFP is due for the fund. It's really been a lot of fun. The gateway will shut down between the 10th and the 16th of January, and everything will run through the state financial system after the 16th of January. So I know that there are some shelters on this call. If you're on the Grants Gateway, you need to start this process. I've been emailing out to people, and municipalities do as well. Everybody has to do it. So next slide. So the present RFP for the 23-24 funding is due on January 29th of next year. So in a month or so. These are the eligible expenses. All right. Direct costs related to construction, renovation, rehab, installation, acquisition, or expansion of buildings, equipment, or facilities necessary for the secure containment, health, and adequate care of sheltered companion animals. Labor performed by outside employees, which is the contractors, the people who are doing the work for you. This funding will also be eligible for labor performed by municipal employees. And so as an example, the town of Saugerties, their municipal employees were going to do the demolition of the old shelter, clear the land, all that sort of stuff. And they could use that labor for their match. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So the eligible expenses here are also that labor performed by municipal employees and as well as project oversight by shelter management. Next slide. HVAC, which is one of the most important parts of this entire process, is also eligible, and medical equipment or facilities used exclusively for your sheltered dogs and cats. You can't use this money to build a medical facility that will then provide medical care, veterinary care for anybody who walks in the door. Okay, it's got to be for the dogs and cats and other companion animals like rabbits. And there are some shelters that have snakes and other exotics, but it's got to be for the animals there. What is not eligible or ineligible is what I just said: medical equipment used for community or outpatient services, labor performed by shelter management, volunteers, or shelter employees, volunteers, or management, unless performed by municipal employees. Okay, next slide. The purchase of land. A lot of people call me and say, can we use this money to buy land? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, nor is architectural or design fees covered by this. Those are the things the state wants to see that you already have. And if you are serious about this project, you already have to have contracted with an architect or a design construction firm, design build firm, and have plans, because they want to see the plans in the RFP. They want to see what you're going to do. It also doesn't cover archaeological studies, blacktopping, or vehicles. Some people have asked, well, if we do a mobile unit, will this pay for it? And the answer to that is no. This is for bricks and mortar shelters. Next slide. Eligibility: all nonprofits and municipal animal shelters, humane societies, SPCAs, animal protective associations. All of those are the different ways that these organizations are defined in state law. And now non-residence-based rescues. And we included those folks in last year's language because of the Companion Animal Care Standards Act, because the act covers both shelters and rescues. So the amounts you can get, if you're upstate or on Long Island, and this has to do with population, if you're serving one municipality, so if you're a town shelter and you're only serving your town, you can get up to 50, you can get from $50,000 to $200,000. If you are a town, a municipal shelter that is serving your town and another town, or a nonprofit shelter that has 2 or more municipal contracts, you can get between $100,000 and $500,000. And if you're in New York City, because of the population, it goes from $100,000 to $500,000. Next slide, please. Now, the match is this. It's only 10% across the board. And what I'm talking about is you have to show in your RFP application that you've got 10% of this money in the bank as a match. It used to be 25 to 50% based on a formula that was put together at the beginning of this process. We went to the legislature and to the governor's office and everybody else in Ag and Markets last year and said, look, a lot of organizations have been able to access this money, but the smaller organizations, the smaller municipalities, The 25 to 50% match was just too much. And so we got them to bring it down to 10% across the board, which makes this money much more accessible to many more organizations. Now, if you're going to build a new shelter, like Susquehanna built a new shelter, and it opened July of 2 years ago, this past July. It was a $5.5 million project. They did not get $5.5 million from the fund. They got $500,000. So the RFP is crafted in a way where you're paying for parts of the project. It could be the HVAC, it could be kennels, cat condos, it could be medical equipment, it could be lots of different parts of the project, but it's not going to be, say, $7 million for the entire project. That you're not going to get that money. So you have to be very clear what this money is going to be going for, and you have to show estimates and all of that sort of stuff, as well as the plans that go with it. Next slide, please. Now, the kicker here is that the Association of Shelter Vet Standards from 2010 is what this RFP is written to. So whoever you might be having write your grant, whether you work with us or you have, not many municipalities have their own grant writers, they have to, the grant has to be written to these standards of care. Okay, so it's really important for your grant writer to familiarize themselves with these standards of care and write the grant to the standards of care. And I put it up on our website, and you can see the link there. And I'll send it out. I'll send the actual link to Mark and folks, and they can send it out when they send out other information. It's the only thing on that particular page, but it's really important for your grant writers to become proficient in these standards. If the grant is not written to these standards, it will be bounced out. Okay, and the other thing I want to say is this. One of the things that Ag-and-Markets wants to see is letters of support from local whomever. So for shelters, local elected officials. For municipalities, your county executive, your town supervisor, your state senator or assemblyman, community leaders. Make sure that you get those letters of recommendation. They mean a lot. It means that that you as a shelter, whether municipal or nonprofit, is out in the community talking to people, and people are recognizing the importance of what you're doing. So next slide. So as I said before, the match was lowered to 10%, and it's for non-residence-based rescues. All right, so what does that mean? That means it's a rescue that is bricks and mortar. Okay, it's not a foster-based rescue where the organization goes and gets animals and then they foster them out into people's homes, and that's all that they do. Shelters do have foster programs, but they're bricks and mortar. Some rescues are bricks and mortar, and some are non-residence based. The state's not going to pay to improve somebody's house for family daycare. They're not going to pay to improve someone's house for foster-based rescues either. And so it's a non-residence based rescue. I call it bricks and mortar. Okay, and these changes were made because of the passage of the Companion Animal Care Standards Act. Okay, and so the fund is there. I mean, it's been there before the act, and now it's there after the act, and it's much more accessible to help shelters and rescues make the capital changes needed to meet the standards. And I'm going to go through that in a minute. So exactly what are the standards? I'm really glad you asked. So I know you didn't, but that's okay. So let's go to the next slide. So the Care Standards Act has been in discussion since I started at the Fed in 2013. And we've gone through various iterations. Working groups of large, medium, and small shelters were involved in crafting the language and making sure that this was not going to be, overwhelming for the organizations. We've gotten some feedback on it, and I'll talk about that as we go through. But this basically is a new article of law. It's Article 26, Chapter C. It's a 26-page bill. It raises the standard of care for homeless companion animals at shelters and rescues across New York. It was passed unanimously in both houses. We said we wanted it. And the legislature said, okay, and they passed this bill. And it really is a groundbreaking bill, not only for New York, but nationally as well. Prior to this, only shelters with municipal contracts were inspected by Ag and Markets. Now everyone will be. Shelters were not overseen at all. The only thing, rescues were not overseen at all. The only thing rescues had to do, and this was a bill that we passed in 2017, was register with the state, because no one had any idea who the rescues were. Now we have an idea, and it's like 4 to 1, 4 rescues for every shelter. And so all of them, municipal shelters, nonprofit shelters with or without municipal contracts, and rescues will be overseen and inspected. And it covers everything from vet care and behavior to transport and the physical plant. Next slide. Everyone will be licensed as an animal shelter, and that's what the law calls for. So the rescue registration bill that we passed that I just talked about will be subsumed by the new Standards Act. So that bill disappears and the new one comes in. It takes effect on December 15th, 2025. When we did this and we talked to the legislature, we specifically said we needed a long effective date, 3 years, so that organizations can make the changes they needed to meet the standards. And that's where the Companion Animal Capital Fund comes in terms of meeting the physical standards that needs to be in there. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So as an overview, this is what the Standards Act covers. It has definitions, so you can be very clear about what we're talking about. Licensing and inspection, training, record keeping and protocols, facility standards, housing, sanitation, management, husbandry, vet care, behavior, transport, foster care, and violations. This bill too was written to the Association of Shelter Vet 2010 standards. So we did this on purpose. It wasn't, there was a method to this madness where the RFP for the capital fund is written to those standards and this bill is written to those standards. And so that it's not like we had to reinvent the wheel, because it was a question that came up when we were talking to legislators about this. And they were like, well, is this going to be in line with the fund? And we said, absolutely, they're written to the same standards. Next slide. So the definitions, they detail what various terms mean. And you can look, the bill is on the Education Fund website, and I'll send the link to Mark and he can send it out if you haven't seen it yet. Adoption means the transfer of legal ownership. An adult dog or cat is 5 months or older. Animals mean a dog and a cat. This is like one of the first times that cats are actually recognized in state law. When you go to Article 7 and animal cruelty, cats aren't necessarily part of the mix. And, dog control officers don't have to deal with cats. Animal control officers do. It's really one of those things. So, and an animal shelter is a public or not-for-profit entity owning, operating, or otherwise maintaining a building, structure, or facility, and that includes a personal residence. However, it has to be a separate part of that residence. Okay, next slide. So they'll all be licensed. As I said, it's going to supplant the registration. You have to prove you're not a pet dealer, and that's about your proof of incorporation as a nonprofit. And so you have to be a 501c3. You have to do your charitable 500 for the state. You have to be you have to do everything you need to do. For municipal shelters, you have to be a municipality and you have to show that. Okay. And as I said, all the disclosures you currently make under registration will be transferred to the new law, and it'll be $150 annually. It was $100, now it's going to be $150. And you know, it's not that big of a lift. So next slide. So training requirements. Your staff needs to be trained, those with direct animal care responsibility. So they have to have training within 60 days of employment. Annually after that, there has to be documentation. It has to be, all the documentation has to be maintained for at least 3 years. And this training can be webinars, on-site lectures, seminars, off-site conferences. We're going to be putting together a host of trainings specific to what's needed in the bill. And we've also put together a list of trainings that are already online and available to people. And we're going to be making that public relatively soon. So, you know, it's not like we're leaving people out in the cold here. We knew that there was a lot of work that we needed to do, and we're making that happen. Next slide. Record keeping is really important. Again, 3 years. There are programs that are out there. There's Pet Point, there's Shelter Love. There's a number of different programs that are web-based or cloud-based where you can track your animals. And it's really important to, if you're still doing it on an Excel spreadsheet, it's really important to move on to one of these cloud-based programs so that you can, it can be done better, and you can do the reports that need to be done. Okay, so, and it's all these different things: who surrendered, the date of intake, departure or adoption, the status, redeemed, adopted, died, humanely euthanized, the behavioral history, all vet and behavioral exams. These are part of the record keeping. Next slide, please. Facility standards. Well, yeah, no, yeah, that's it. That's the right one. So one of the most important things in all of this is that your indoor surfaces have to be non-porous, water resistant, non-toxic, and able to withstand regular cleaning and disinfection. So that means animals cannot be housed on a concrete floor. Concrete floors are porous and can be great disseminators of disease. Okay, so they need to be, these surfaces need to be non-porous and water resistant, and they need to be able to be cleaned regularly. Cleaning is really important in a shelter situation. If it's not clean, that's how disease spreads. If it's concrete, that's how disease spreads. So, and I know that some of you may need to make these changes, and that's what the capital fund is for, so that you can put in new flooring. You have to have electrical power and running water at all times. And so I can tell you that there have been shelters that have gotten generators from the capital fund to make sure that there will be electrical if the power goes out. And given the weather events we've been having, that will happen. You have to have emergency plans and readily accessible sink, and soap and towels or electric hand dryers. Because when people handle an animal and don't wash their hands or don't change their gloves or don't, you know, you can transfer from one animal to the other. If you're working with healthy animals, you can still transfer whatever one animal might have to the other. If you're working with sick animals, you really can very easily transfer disease. Next slide. Temperature has to be between 60 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Each animal has to be monitored, make sure they're in an environment that allows their normal body temp. We have to document regular maintenance of the air handling system. One of my shelters was like, do my staff have to go into the HVAC system? I said, no, you hire someone to do that, and you have to document that you're regularly maintaining that air handling system. Air handling is incredibly important in all of this. I'm sure I say this later on, but I'll say it again, because I know, as Mark does, it takes at least 7 times for things to sink in. Air handling, if you have air handling where sick air goes into clean air, and the sick air is where the sick animals are, and that air circulates and goes into where the healthy animals are, you're putting the healthy animals at risk, and they could get the diseases. So it's really important for the air handling to be done correctly. Ammonia levels need to be less than 2 parts per million. And that has to do with all the excrement and urination that happens. Next slide, please. Separate housing areas for each species. Now, I know this is going to be hard for some, and it's going to be one of those things that's going to be a goal in these standards. Newer shelters that are being built, they do have separate facilities for the separate housing for each species. Mohawk Hudson Humane Society, there was a door between where the dog kennels were and where the cats were. The new shelter, they are on totally separate parts of the building, and you can't even hear, when you're with the cats, which are more in the front of the building, you can't even hear the dogs, which are in the back of the building. Okay, so there's separate housing. Sick animals need to be segregated in isolation rooms so that disease isn't spread. Sound levels should not exceed 85 decibels, which I know is not going to be always easy because dog barking gets very loud, but at least what we need to do is maintain behavioral stuff so that they don't get so riled up that they continually bark. And that's a behavioral issue. Adequate lighting and a means to maintain diurnal light cycles. So 8 hours each of light and darkness within a 24-hour period. Excellent, thank you. So animal populations should be segregated, separate rooms, right? Same species separated by age groups. As I said before, animals with infectious diseases must be isolated. And segregation isn't mandated when animals are in the medical care pre or post-op. They're all there together. But that's up to your vet as well. If you have a vet, they may very well want to and should keep really sick animals, like puppies with parvo, need to be kept away from everybody else, and that sort of thing. When dogs and cats within a week of giving birth or until separation from the offspring should have a solid floor that's non-porous. They need to be able to lie fully stretched out so they can nurse, okay? And it has to be large enough for the mom to be able to leave that box as well. Next slide. Primary enclosures. They have to be big enough for the animals to be able to stand up, sit down, stretch its body, circle, be comfortable, right? And stand upright without its head or tail touching the sides of the enclosure. What we see in a lot of newer shelters are kennels for dogs with what they call guillotine doors. It's the best way you can say it. Doors that go up and down, and the animals can go in the back space to eliminate, and then come up front to eat and to sleep and to look cute, so people will adopt them. And in the back, if you go to some of the newer shelters, you'll see that there are drainage. There's drainage in the back of these. There's one long drainage that runs throughout the kennels in the spot of the kennel where they go to eliminate. So it's easier to clean. Next slide. If you have 2 or more animals in an enclosure, and honestly, right now, all the shelters are really at max capacity. It's because of a number of reasons, evictions. People got a lot of puppies during COVID, and once they went back to work, they realized, oops, I can't take care of them. Here you go, shelter, have my dog. And the economy has impacted this as well as we've done a really good job of raising the importance of law enforcement and district attorneys paying attention to animal crimes. And so there are more animals from those crimes being kept at shelters. So the shelters are at max, and there are times when an enclosure will have 2 or more animals. You have to make sure there's sufficient space to maintain social distance and adequate area for the dog, it's usually dogs, to be able to be comfortable. So in this, regardless of the size of a room or enclosure, the number of animals co-housed shall not exceed the following: 12 adult cats or 2 litters of kittens, 5 adult dogs, or 1 litter of puppies. So there's a movement to do community cat rooms, right? To have a lot of cats in a room, and people can go and look and, go go in and play with the cats and decide who they want to adopt. Some of those rooms have 20 cats in them. That will no longer be acceptable. It can only be 12 adult cats at a time. People, I've gone to shelters and, you know, oh, the cats are sleeping, the cats are comfortable, the cats are this, the cats are shut down. And so, you know, I think that there's going to be more discussion about how effective those kinds of rooms are. But for now, you can only have, once these standards take effect in December of 2025, only 12 adult cats in a cat room. Next slide. So puppies and kittens less than 6 weeks must be housed with their moms. With fosters or a surrogate mom, animals should not be housed outside for more than 12 hours within a 24-hour period. So there are some shelters that have outside enclosures, so the dogs can't be there for more than 12 hours. The exception to this is free roaming cats under the care of the shelter. So there are some shelters that have community, what we really call community cats, ferals, free roaming cats. They care for them, but they live outside. That's okay. And the outside enclosures must also comply with the standards of the bill. So if you have outside enclosures, the floor has to be non-porous. Okay, it can't just be concrete. It can't just be a garage that you converted. If an animal's at the shelter for 14 days or longer, they must have some alternative housing, either an enriched cage, which is twice the size, okay, otherwise required for the animal size. So it means moving a smaller dog into a medium-sized kennel, a larger dog into a double wide. They could go to foster care, they could go into congregate housing. But again, the congregate housing is based on the numbers that we just talked about. Next slide. Sanitation, as I've been saying all along, is very important. These protocols have to be done on a, they have to be taken very, very seriously, because this is how disease spreads. All right, so, you know, and this is pretty self-explanatory. There are cleaning supplies that are effective in a shelter environment and some that are not. So you need to use the ones that are. You have to remove the animals before cleaning, dedicated equipment for in each area for each species, so that you're not taking stuff that you clean the dog kennels with and bringing into the cat room. You know, you have to clean and disinfect items and surfaces that come into contact with the animals. So food and water bowls, litter boxes, all of that sort of stuff. And when new animals come in, those enclosures have to be cleaned and disinfected. Next slide. Daily cleaning and at least once a week disinfecting for those who are there for long term. Laundering in a washing machine with detergent and thoroughly dried. Many shelters are using the fund to purchase commercial grade laundry facilities. And it's needed, because you can go into a shelter and you'll see cats on blankets, dogs on blankets, all of it. All of that stuff needs to be washed, hot water, real detergent, and dried. Cleaning outdoor premises from clutter, remove fecal matter at least once daily, and, you know, PPE for the folks that are doing the cleaning, protective garments. Next slide, please. Shelter management protocols. This is something we're working on as well, but there's got to be clear written management structure. Who's in charge of what? And everybody needs to know what that means and who they report to, okay, and what their responsibilities are. This is no longer mom and pop time. This is serious. Animal welfare is a profession. People who work in it need to be treated as professionals, and it's serious. We're dealing with live entities. We're dealing with sentient beings. So we need sufficient staffing, you know, to do all the things that need to be done. Next slide. In terms of husbandry, fresh water, nutritionally balanced, species specific and life stage appropriate diet, feed at once daily for adults and twice daily for animals less than 6 months, and 3 times daily for animals less than 2 months, And there has to be commercial grade refrigeration, let me put it to you that way, for perishable food. So again, a refrigerator, a commercial grade refrigerator, if you're a large shelter, is something you can apply for the fund. Next slide. Under orders of a vet, frightened animals may be appropriately tranquilized. That does not mean euthanized, but tranquilized. You can't use physical force as punishment. Restraint devices and handling techniques shall minimize animal stress and risk of injury to animal and shelter workers only if necessary, and make sure that all the equipment is in good working order. Next slide. Veterinary care. Prescription meds and treatment shall be administered under the supervision and advisement of a vet. That's state law. There are certain things that only a vet can do, like a rabies shot, and they have to be there to do it. Or the dog goes or the animals go to the vet. It's all according if you have a vet on staff or not. All drugs are documented and dispensed in accordance with the law. We would like to see that all animals are assessed within 2 hours after intake by trained shelter staff, and there will be information about what that means in terms of what the assessment should be. And then provide veterinary assessment and humane care in a timely fashion, either in-house or off-site. So there right now is a shortage of veterinarians. The vets on the call can talk about, can back me up on this, because I know that there are some vets on this call. There is a shortage, and that's exacerbated by, say you're in Wyoming County and there are really only 2 or 3 vets in the entire county, and some of them do large animal veterinary work. And so you can't get an appointment for 2 weeks. We understand that. You just have to do it as quickly as humanly possible. So for shelters in urban areas or, large suburban areas like the Capital Region, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, we'd like to see those animals seen much more quickly. But there's a recognition that the animals that are in really rural areas may not be able to be seen as quickly as we'd like. So next, you just have to prove that you're trying to do it, and ultimately you do. So you want to treat acute and chronic pain. The legal status of the animal should not prevent treatment to relieve suffering. So if an animal comes in as from an animal cruelty case, and the owner of that animal has not relinquished its ownership, and this case is going to go to court, the shelter still needs to provide medical treatment so that the animal's not suffering. Okay, and there's a complete physical exam by a trained shelter staff. We don't need a vet to do this within 24 hours of intake. They need to be vaccinated. Again, the vets have to do rabies. Vet techs and others at the shelter can do some of the other vaccines, and they need to be treated for hookworms and roundworms prior to release or placement in foster care. Those 2 are very communicable diseases, and so they need to be dealt with quickly. We have to provide regular grooming. The new thing here, one would think that this is sort of common sense, but it wasn't in the law before, but it's going to be in the law now. No animal can be adopted unless it is spayed or neutered. When we went to a shelter and got one of our first dog, we had to go and get it neutered. And we were given a coupon, $35 off or whatever it was. We just did it and we took care of it. Now all animals have to be spayed or neutered before they're adopted, and this is really important because it will keep the animal, it'll control the animal population. There should be a permanent tattoo saying that it got spayed. And shelters have to provide adopters with instructions on how to deal with post-operative care. Next, okay, transportation. This is a really, this is for those shelters that are bringing in animals mainly from the South, where they do not routinely spay or neuter, taken from high kill shelters, and even if our shelters are transporting to other shelters. The origin shelter has to examine each dog and cat for medical behavior and concerns within 24 hours, and everything is recorded and communicated. There has to be a certificate of health signed by a vet before it leaves shelter A to go to shelter B. This does not always happen. One thinks it happens, but it does not always happen. And it has caused some real problems over the long term. Each animal has to be identified with a collar, a tag, a tattoo, a microchip, some kind of identifier, so that the dog or cat can be identified. Vehicles have to, the operators have to adhere to applicable law. One would think that that would be sort of okay, but still, there are some unscrupulous people out there. No animal shall be placed unconfined or untethered in the back of an open pickup or flatbed. All animals must be confined in an enclosure, and the vehicles have to have adequate space, comfortable environmental conditions, and good air quality. We've had situations where animals are dead when they get to the shelter because of the bad ventilation, just bad transport protocol. No animal, okay, so let me just take a drink for a minute. We have some situations where there are some shelters that say they're rescuing puppies from puppy mills, and they bring those puppies into New York under the guise of rescue. They're actually paying for them. And then they go on what I call the puppy mill pipeline train up to upstate New York. And I get calls and say, I just got a puppy from X, Y, and Z rescue or shelter, and it's got parvo. What do I do? And we know these puppies came in this way. And I tell them what they can do. Be prepared to spend a lot of money and be prepared for the animal not to survive. So this bill shuts that down. So no animal shelter or its agency, and it's the animal shelter as in the licensed animal shelter once this bill comes into effect, shall transport any dog or cat less than 1 year of age whose point of origin is any breeder licensed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is one more way for us to shut down the puppy mill pipeline into New York State. You would think, shelters are doing this? The answer is yes. And that's going to stop when this bill takes effect. So foster care, okay? There's a lot of, in the Capital District, we have a lot of foster care providers, and we have rescues that are just foster based. So no person can operate as a foster care provider, right, taking in an animal without a signed written agreement with the shelter or the rescue, okay? And they operate as a foster care provider with the approval and responsibility of the shelter. So the shelter is ultimately responsible. And a copy of that agreement is kept at the shelter and the foster and made available for inspection if asked by the Commissioner of Ag and Markets. Now, inspectors aren't going to go into people's homes who are doing foster care. But if there is a complaint, there will be a complaint-based inspection. But there has to be a complaint. But it's really important for there to be these policies and procedures so that everybody knows who owns the animal, who can adopt the animal out, who's responsible for the animal. Next slide. So the fosters don't own the animal. The shelter facilitates the adoption. They have to keep a copy and maintain a record. And then there's to protect the identity of the source of an animal. And this is usually a domestic violence situation because there are safe haven programs across the state where mostly women who are in domestic violence situations, they don't leave because of the threat to the animal as well as the threat to the kid, but they can take their kids with them to the shelter, the domestic violence shelter. They can't necessarily take their animal. There's a growing amount of DV shelters now that are allowing animals, but not across the board. And so shelters have safe haven programs where they take in the animal for the woman or the person being abused who's left the premises, and the source of that animal is protected, so that the abuser can't come and say, that's my dog, I want it back, and then somehow find out where the person who was abused is and in what shelter that person is. We all have seen these stories. We all know that this happens. And this is one way that shelters help the community and help domestic violence folks, not folks, but domestic violence shelters and the people who are victims of domestic violence. So, and any foster animal affected by an infectious or contagious disease shall be handled in the manner that prevents spread. So again, if a foster has a sick puppy or a sick cat, they have to keep it separate from all the other cats that they might have. Okay, next. Okay, so sorry about my voice. It's that time of year. I want to thank you all for coming to this and participating. This is my email address. This is the work number for the Fed, but this is my cell number, and that's really the number you want to call me on, because I pick that up on a regular basis. And the work number goes to a voicemail, and I listen to it, and then I call people back. And our website is nysapf.org. The information on the Care Standards Consulting is at our Ed Fund site, which is nysapfedfund.org. Okay.
Thank you, Libby. That was great. That was a lot of information, and we have some questions in here. So I'm going to start running through the questions.
Okay.
But in the meantime, other folks who have questions, either based on the presentation or on the questions I'm asking, please type them in now, or as those questions come to you, please type them in, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. The first is two-part. The terms sanitize and disinfect are used interchangeably in the new bill, but they are different levels of combating pathogens. Will there be clarification in the final version? And there's a follow-up from Sarah that says, to clarify my question, sanitizing kills bacteria, but not viruses. You need to disinfect to kill viruses. So will there be clarification on that?
Yes. So one of the things that we're doing is we're putting together model policies and procedures on every part of this bill. And that those will be made available on our website, so that we will be very clear about disinfection and everything else that needs to be done. And I'll take a look at, I'll make note of bacterial versus viral and what needs to be done for each.
Great. And staying on that, trainings to ensure that sanitation and care practices, will there be recommended trainings to ensure that sanitation and care practices are the standards of the Act?
Yes, yes. That's the other thing that we're going to be doing, is providing the trainings or providing links to trainings that already have been done. We've gone through ASPCA Pro, Humane Pro, and the Association of Animal Welfare Administrators. They all have had trainings that they've done. We've been looking at all of them, and we'll be putting together a listing that people can access on the website. I have to speak with the folks at AWA, the Association of Animal Welfare Administrators. They let their stuff be available only to their members. I'm a member, so I'm going to see what I can work out so that those things can be made available to everybody.
Okay, and for the counties that are on the call, does a county shelter count as a shelter that services more than one municipality because of all the towns and villages within the county? Therefore, would it be eligible for greater funding?
Here's what I would suggest you do. Have a letters of agreement with all the towns and villages. And then the answer to that question will be yes.
Okay, great. If the shelter is full, how can we alter cages? Dogs are not being adopted within 14 days. Would removing the cage and taking to a quiet room for enrichment qualify as altering the environment?
Yes, because it's a bigger space and you can have congregate housing of dogs that can live together and not be, not have a problem living together. And I went over it before. I think it's like 6 or 8 dogs that can be together. Let me just be clear about something. And a lot of people have said to me, oh, we're going to get shut down. No one's getting shut down. Yes, this is a law. Ag and Markets understands that this is not going to be, oh, I'm going to snap my fingers and everything's going to be great on December 15th, 2025. We've given people 3 years, but we also know that this is going to be a long-term process for many shelters. And so, you know, Ag and Markets, I'm on the working group with Ag and Markets about how they're going to do the inspections, and they're using the documentation that we've already developed for our consulting services. And so we're all going to be working together to help everybody meet the standards ultimately. So no one's, you know, no one's going to get shut down in the first inspection. And as long as you show that you're working towards making things better, that's what Ag and Markets wants to see. If you're an organization that refuses to make any changes, then that's a different ballgame.
Great, thank you. Is the updating of HR documentation training to adhere to ACT standards included in the eligible activities of the grant?
Say that again?
So a facility is updating their HR documentation and training to adhere to these CARE Act standards. Are these eligible activities for the grant?
No, the grant is for capital projects, period. So new kennels, new cat condos, a new roof, new HVAC. It's not for policies and procedure upgrades.
Okay, the one municipal contract and the shelter is in a different town. Is that $200,000 or $500,000 possible eligibility?
So if a town shelter provides the service for its town and one other town, is that what's being asked?
Yes.
Yeah, you can get up.
It looks like no. Well, not exactly sure.
If that's the question, you can get up to $500,000.
I think that is the question, but please clarify if you need to.
So as an example, Saugerties, the town of Saugerties also provides animal sheltering services for the town of Woodstock. So 2 municipalities, 1 municipal shelter, they got $500,000. And they're going to be building a new shelter because they're raising money for everything else.
Okay, great. Does no open bed transport apply to DCOs?
No open bed?
So you can't transport an animal in an open bed truck?
Oh, you mean yes. I'm pretty sure. It's something I'll have to ask, but I'm pretty sure. Well, actually, I'm going to have to ask that question. Okay, because DCOs are under Article 7. So I will ask that question and let Mark know the answer.
Yeah, we'll send you over the questions and who asked them, Libby, so that you can explore them.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's not safe, ultimately, to put a dog in the back of an open flatbed. And to, you know, how are you going to keep the dog, you know, there? You're going to have to chain it down, or, you know, and it could get killed that way. So
we have a couple more questions, and we're running out of time. So if you have a question, please type your question in now. So the grant site will close down in about 3 weeks. It looks like. When will the funding decisions be made, and when will the money start to flow?
Oh, that's a great question. So the thing is due on it's due on the 29th. The RFP is due on the 29th, so that's 5 weeks from now. They will then, within 4 to 6 weeks, I would say it's what usually is. They've got a group of people. I'm not one of those people. It's a little bit of a conflict for me to do it, that review the RFPs and make the decisions. In terms of when the decisions are made public and the funding is released, is out of our hands. So let me just say that once they make these decisions, a letter will go out to the organization saying they're going to get the grant. Then the announcement needs to be gone through on the second floor, and the governor needs to make the announcement. They need to do, the formal thing. And then the process will start. Once you get that letter, the process will start in terms of getting all the paperwork, all the other paperwork that you need to get done, so that the state controller's office will execute the contracts. That could take 6 to 9 months. Okay. And 2 years ago, when the contracts office at Ag and Markets had been, attritioned out, it took a lot longer. And honestly, I had to supersede and make some calls to the controller's office to get those contracts out. The letters that came out for the last RFP, those contracts were just executed in the last few weeks. We're hoping that with this transition to the state financial system, things will work a little more smoothly. What happens once you get the grant and the contract is let, you can bill for the first 25% of the project. The folks at Ag and Markets understand that, you need to start doing this work, and you'll have to talk with them about how much you can start doing without jeopardizing the money. That is totally out of my hands.
Okay, great. Can infrastructure, drainage, site work be included in the grant request?
Yes, because that speaks specifically to the health and welfare of the animal. Drainage, infrastructure is floor, roofing, HVAC, yes. The plans, however, the actual architectural plans are not.
And are municipal facilities eligible to join the federation, and what are the benefits of joining the federation?
Absolutely. Thank you, someone who asked that question, for asking. We have a number of municipal shelters as members. The benefits are many. One is that we lobby for you on issues of your concern at the legislature. We stop bad bills, we get good bills passed, all that sort of stuff. We also do work on animal crimes and humane law enforcement. The low-cost grant writers that we have are just for our members. All the work we're doing around policies and procedures will be for our members. I mean, there's got to be some benefit to being a member, and we can't just make everything available to everyone. The shelter consulting services are available to everyone because that was part of getting the grant money. The other thing about being part of the Fed is we have a listserv and we share information. And when there are situations where shelters need help, we send out information to the listserv. And up until this past year, shelters really have been able to help one another with animal overflow and that sort of stuff. Everyone right now is stressed to the max, but there are still shelters that have been able to take animals from other shelters. We share a lot of information amongst ourselves, and you're not alone. I mean, that's basically, the best thing about the Fed is you're not alone in your little island, in your little municipality. You're part of a larger organization that advocates on your behalf, provides services and programs on your behalf, and is working for you. Much like NYSAC, only a little smaller.
Great, thank you, Libby. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Libby Post for offering her expertise and time this morning to present this webinar, and to thank all of you for attending. From all of us at the New York State Association of Counties, to all of you, we wish you a happy holidays and a healthy and happy new year. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.